Sí, bien en camino.
Cafecito y le ponemos unas galletitas. ¿Le tinca, profesor? ¿Pero vas a estar solo tú?
Va a venir como 5 personas más.
Ya. No, son varios. ¿Cinco personas más? Sí. Ah, va a ser un YouTube Live.
Sí, pero no me acuerdo cómo se hace.
Mm.
¿Cómo se hacía? ¿Cómo se hacía?
Pero te da la opción el Zoom para el YouTube, ¿cierto?
Eh, sí,
Marcia, ¿cómo encontráis que está allá? ¿Se está poniendo amarilla? No, yo la encuentro que está más abierta. Está más
¿sí?
viva. Ah, sí. Ya. ¿Y cómo encontráis esta? Esta le falta que sea más. Oh, está cayendo, porque si se está cayendo no se está, no se está. No, es que lo que pasa es que está, es muy, la vara es muy larga para el palo que pusiste de macetero. Que el macetero, que ella es de macetero grande. Sí. Hola, hola, hola.
Hola, ¿cómo está ahí?
Vamos de ahí para que
Aquí empezando.
Eh, one moment.
ahora comandante Catena,
Y Andrés.
ok, ya. Ya estamos transmitiendo.
Yes.
No sé qué es lo que haces cada vez, pero ¿cómo lo hiciste?
¿No se ve?
¿Eh?
¿Solo tiene pila?
Quizás tenés alguna maña que solo tú conoces.
¿No?
Always is the best tool we have to solve problems we would not have without it.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Always there's something with technology. But you know, as I'm member of the the European Environment Agency and the scientific committee, we had discussions with each of the departments, 6 departments. And everything went perfectly fine until the 6th presentation, where all electronics collapsed, and that was with the IT department. And they were so pissed off that it really collapsed with them.
De nuevo, si queréis yo lo paso con el dedo acá.
Mejor.
Es que es como el problema del ángulo en el que le llega. Ese
No,
es el problema.
como que se demora.
No, el problema es que el receptor tiene dificultad.
A ver, entonces allá. Ahí, cambió. ¿Sí?
Okay. If it doesn't work, we will help.
Yeah.
Bien, ¿estamos transmitiendo? ¿Estamos saliendo al aire?
Sí, estamos en vivo y en directo.
Entonces, en ese caso, hoy 15 de noviembre les damos la bienvenida aquí al Instituto de Geografía de la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso y también en colaboración con el programa de Magíster en Geografía y en colaboración con el proyecto Anillos Pluriversos del Cambio Climático. Tenemos la suerte de tener con nosotros al profesor Joachin Spangenberg, quien ha sido un colaborador permanente nuestro. Estuvo con nosotros en el año 2019 en Temuco, en la Sociedad Chilena de Ciencias Geográficas. Hoy estuvo en el Congreso de Servicios Ecosistémicos en La Serena y tenemos la suerte de que nos visita hoy en Valparaíso y ha tenido la amabilidad de compartir con nosotros esta conferencia, a la cual dejamos invitados a todo el público presente y ya quienes nos siguen en territorios alternativos por YouTube Live. Profesor Spangenberg, adelante. Esta presentación va a ser en inglés. Hay algunas láminas en castellano y después vamos a contar con la transmisión con subtítulos, pero de momento tenemos que hacer nuestro mejor esfuerzo en entender la presentación del profesor. Adelante, Joachim.
So, my name is Joachin Spangenberg. By education, I'm a biologist, ecologist, and economist. So I have the excuse to be no geographer. Secondly, my Spanish is un poco chino, so I have the excuse for not speaking Spanish. And given these two handicaps, I'm particularly grateful to be invited to give this presentation in the Institute of Valparaíso University right here. Some of the text is in Spanish, which I managed to translate using the DeepL system. Some of the text is in English. I think I can go through the Spanish a bit faster than through the English. And what you see right here is my ResearchGate address. I usually upload all presentations, well, except for the copyright protected elements to the ResearchGate. I tried that with this presentation this morning, but the internet was very slow. So I will do it later, and then everybody can have a look at things which may have been too fast. Andres told me that I should cover just something or everything. So I decided to cover the past, the present, and the future, because that's everything. To start with the past, this is something you pretty well know, it's of your history, but this was the first specific reduction of carbon dioxide by humans, because the Spanish invasion killed about 80% of the population, which means that the land was depopulated, the trees and plants were growing, they were extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and from these ice core drilling of carbon dioxide content, we now know that this led to a significant decrease, a measurable decrease of global temperatures. Well, it was the first quantified impact of humanity. And the second point is the superiority of Spanish was not in the weapon. So these few guys have not been that superior. There's superiority within the immune system, because few of the Spanish died of Latin American diseases, but 80% of the population have Spanish diseases. So the immune system was absolutely superior. As a biologist, I can tell you how that happens, because the immune system is a learning system. And only if you grow up in conditions which are absolutely unhygienic, dirty, and quite unhealthy, your immune system gets a perfect training. So the fact that the immune system of the Spanish was much better shows that the hygienic situation in the Latin American civilization was much better than in Spain. So that I found it, as a biologist, quite an interesting conclusion from the fact that we had. So that was the first quantifiable impact. And it started with the Spanish Empire, and we saw that we had usually a duopoly of empires, Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, USA, USSR, now China, maybe China, India sometime. That's what they hope. I think it will not materialize because all the empires have been squandering resources, so there are so little left over that for the next empire there will be not enough there. So empires come, fight and go, and unfortunately they never go peacefully. So that is why I'm very much worried. Currently, as we have this change over here, what will happen? Because the main superiority of the United States over all other countries is not economic power, it's military power. And there is a phrase saying, if you are a hammer, the world appears to you as being made of nails. So you can use your hammer on everything. And that is a risky situation. Even the United States even have a law, official law, that if someone, American citizens, are arrested and on trial under the International Human Rights Court in Den Haag, that the US Army is entitled to invade Den Haag and rescue them. So that is, if you're the hammer. And what I find interesting, What I find interesting is the fact that the influence of colonial empires remains, but fades with the next layer. So you have significant influence, not only in Spanish culture, but also Spanish enterprises, things like that in the whole of South America. Britain and France did not play such a massive role over here, but of course you have significant impact as a layer over that from the United States. And you see also that China tries to get an influence and have an additional layer of influence, and they all coexist. So when you talk about decolonization, it's decolonization from the whole change of empires, which is usually forgotten. But okay, I found that interesting that the different capas the influence there. So what happened to neoliberalism? You remember what neoliberalism was? How it was promised? It was not only the primacy of the market nationally and internationally, it was also that market mechanisms are efficient, that they are stable and self-regulating. That has not been repeated after the financial crisis that much. And because they were self-regulating, then deregulation and privatization were the common strategies. And the justification for that rests on this. And then the international, transnational companies were considered as a insurance against anti-economicals, which means against economic logic, because the suspicion was politicians are always acting against the logic, and the real logic is with business. That is the global market will deliver on everything. You do not hear that repeated that much, the whole list these days, but that was the original promise of neoliberalism. And that is why I say that the neoliberalism has died. The neoliberalism as an international global concept has died. We do not have free trade. We have 60% of the world population are under one or the other kind of trade boycotts. That's not free trade. There are restrictions for import and exports. There are financial restrictions. That's not only, and that the 60% figure was under Donald Trump. That was before the boycotts against Russia. But it might now even be more. So free trade, a globalizing world, is over. Banks have been retreating from the periphery back to the center. The increase in global trade has decreased to almost zero. So on the international level, the neoliberalism is dead. Come back. Unfortunately, it's crazy surviving nationally. That national neoliberalism, which is a global concept, but on the global level, it no longer works. It's a contradiction in itself, and that is why I call it zombie versions. And you know, zombies are dangerous. So it's not saying this thing is easy, but it's dangerous. So since then, we are living in the era of neo-imperialism, and that has been shown in Afghanistan, now in Ukraine, and in Palestine, and so forth. So that is what happened. That was about the past. Now the present time. Well, and there could be more things there about it, but so the present time is we're in the Anthropocene. Welcome to the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene essentially is an era of uncertitude. I used to say that the future is no longer what it used to be, which means that people will make plans and experience how the future will be back. When will I buy a house or a car, something like that? When will I have enough money to have effect and things like that? Uncertainty means that there is no solid basis for these plans anymore. Pretend that we have with certain measures the global warming to 1.5 or 2%. We have been living for several 10,000 years in the Holocene in a relatively stable climate envelope. We have no idea, and no model gives you any idea, whether at 2 degrees more, there is again a stable state. Because it's a highly evolving dynamic system, the climate Earth system. And if you do not know whether there is a stable state, you cannot predict whether if we stop emitting, not the feedback loops, which have already been set in motion, will continue, bring us to 5 degrees or 10 or whatever, when the Earth system has a stable state again. So that is something where there is no clear prediction. And the idea of tipping points is one which indicates that there are points where we begin to start something where we do not know what the end will be. So we have no idea about the impact on biodiversity. The IPBES, IPBES, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and IPCC, they have been sitting together. IPBES does not want to be called IPBES anymore. It wants to be called IPBES. You could look on the homepage, you even have a little video training you how to pronounce a new name, IPBES. Yeah, IPBES.
Okay.
Yeah. They had a long discussion and they came to the conclusion that with the ongoing destruction of habitats, you are triggering the mechanisms which will make it more and more probable to have more pandemics than ever before. So this is, they really talked about the, era de pandemias. And we are badly prepared for that. We thought it's a unique event. Yeah? Social environmental formation, how to adopt the health system to climate change is absolutely unknown. I will later mention that already this year, 1/4 of the world population was exposed to temperatures which are considered critical as in a sense of health impacts. We have nothing for that to be prepared. And in the end, if we really don't manage to keep the system stable, then the basic legitimation of democratic states is also at risk. So it's really an era de incertitude. And I'm also not very uncertain whether it goes on.
What's up? Intenta mover el mouse. No, es que está pegado.
Como que se...
No, es que está.
Ah, yeah.
Sí, pero achiqué lo achiqué a él.
What I'm saying is, at the moment, decision makers of all kinds, in business, in politics, in trade unions, everywhere, have an insufficient sense of the urgency and gravity of what is happening. I think you all know this planetary boundaries graph, so I don't have to discuss it. But what most people forget is this. That was a planetary boundary of 2009, 2015, and 2023. And if you look at that dynamics, that is something which most people do not have in mind. They know the graph, it doesn't look good, but if you see that development, you should really be in deep sorrow. Hey, come back. Yeah. The transgression of planetary boundaries is a static description. You have a boundary, it's static, and you go over it. In fact, the boundaries are not static, but each transgression, the other boundaries are affected. But it's more or less as an imagination. Here we come to the dynamic element, the tipping points. Tipping points are points in the dynamic system which, when you cross them, trigger a dynamic of its own which you have no longer under control. Yeah, that means you push a stone down from a hill. First, the first 2 meters, you can still stop it. but then it's too late, it runs. Then you are across a tipping point. And so let's look at the tipping point that we have right here. The Greenland ice sheet collapse. This is 1.5 degree. We have moved from possible to probable. It will be happening. The problem with these things is they are unstoppable. So the Greenland ice sheet will melt, and it will mean, I think, 4 meters sea level rise, which is not that bad for Valparaiso because you have very steep mountains. But if you look at Concepcion, which is very flat, the harbor, then well, forget about it. So that is bad news. The problem is that nobody knows how long it will take. Some people say it's centuries, but no, this is my model assumes that there is no interaction which will accelerate it so that it may take centuries. So we have no certainty in that. The same thing with the West Antarctic ice sheet collapse. That is not as much a problem for sea level rise because it's floating ice. So if floating ice melts, it does not increase the sea level. But it's like in the North Pole, it makes the sea free to the sun, which absorbs much more of solar radiation than the ice would have done, which has a much higher albedo. So that means we set into motion a warming up cycle, and we don't know where it will end, North Pole and South Pole. And the second thing is when the ice sheet is gone, this is what keeps back the big glaciers on land. When they are not kept back, they will be floating further to the sea, and that will increase the melting, and that is indeed, again, affecting the sea level rise. So the tropical coral reefs, at 1.5 degree, we expect 90% to be gone, and at 2 degrees, 99%. So if you are a scuba diver, use the opportunities because we're going to reach the 1.5 degree within the next 10 years before 2030. So if you want to see living coral reefs, hurry up. Yeah. Isn't that a horrible message? Yeah? I've done my diving license in the coral reef in Australia. And if someone tells me you have to see it again because in 10 years it's going to be gone globally. And what does that mean? Because the reefs are the most important breeding ground for a diversity of fish species. What does that mean for fish biodiversity, for ocean biodiversity, but also for human protein supply? So, northern permafrost, perhaps thaw, that has been beginning. And that means that permafrost includes a lot of methane. And the methane in the permafrost is more than the carbon which is stored in the world's forest. So if that is being released by the thawing permafrost, then we have a driving force with methane being 30 times as much effective as a greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide. We have set into motion a process which also cannot stop. And this is again things like the ice loss and sea collapse and mountain glaciers loss. This is an underestimation because we know by now that by 2 degrees, except for the Himalaya, all glaciers will be gone globally. In Germany, we have already lost a quarter of the glaciers, which is not only bad for people who like skiing, it's even worse for people who are dependent on the water downstream. Because on the one hand, in the season with high precipitation, the snow was storing it, so the floods were not that high. And in the summer with low precipitation, the snow was melting and kept the level of the water higher. So the water flow was much more even with the water being available. So that will be a problem that we have in parts of Asia, that we have in particular in the big rivers in Asia and a lot of rivers in Europe. In some other countries, you have another problem. For example, Lima, as far as I know, is completely dependent on melting water from glaciers. That will no longer be there. So I heard there are some plans for alternative sources of drinking water for Lima, but none of the plans I heard about is just near covering the demand of the whole population. And if you don't cover the demand of the whole population, then you know who will get the water and who won't. Yeah, so this is how an environmental problem translates into a social problem. And so there are more elements in that, like here. This here is simply wrong because they think that the Amazon will collapse at 3.5 degrees heating. You have to look at the footnote that this excludes deforestation and logging. With the deforestation and logging, the Amazon is here. Because the Western Amazon is already a source of CO2 and no longer a sink. So that has turned, and certain regions are considered to have passed the threshold to water development from forest to steppe. So, and the point then is that we risk that we cross different of the tipping points, and that one tipping point then triggers the next one, so that we go from tipping points to tipping cascades. And since we are causing these things for hundreds of years now, it's also a bit of a failure of science that the idea of tipping cascades emerged in the scientific literature less than 10 years ago. And that says that the tipping points are covered all over the world. It's just to show you that nobody is outside. And we have the problem of telecoupling. There's a fire in the Amazon. You have seen that in the Cerrado and in the Amazon forest in the last year. And you have seen that Rio Paraná in Argentina was completely dried out. And that is linked to each other because the Amazon is creating what they call rivers in the air. So very wet streams, which then bring water to parts of North America, but particularly to a wide range of areas in South America, which will suffer from this if that continues. So that's what I already mentioned. 1/4 of the world population is exposed to dangerous levels of extreme heat. And so who cares? Yeah? Only 4 countries have plans under which emissions would fall. UK, Norway, Germany, and China. However, United Kingdom, Norway, and Germany will not reach the targets in their own plans. The United Kingdom is banning wind energy and wants to invest in more oil and gas from the North Sea drilling. They already have issued some dozen of new licenses. Norway wants to expand the gas production from the Arctic Sea. Germany has delayed the phase out of lignite, the highest carbon emitting kind of coal. And about China, I don't know. Yeah? China appears to be on track, but nobody can be sure. So at least 3 of the 4 will not keep their promises. So as I told you, I've been these days, I took some time to read a book I wanted to read for a long time, which was Dante's Divine Comedy. And in that, you see that those people who make promises and don't keep them land in the deepest part of hell, even more than those who have not made any promise. So I'm going to tell that our government when I'm back. So, and just to remind us that we are not talking only about environmental issues, We have the social human dimension, which is polarization between countries, equity deficits, care and public health crisis, loss of trust, fake news, alternative realities, anti-science. You know these phenomena. There were these demonstrations of scientists, and I went there and I said, well, in my life I've been to quite a number of demonstrations, but that was as a volunteer, as a citizen. It was the first time I'm demonstrating as a scientist. So what the hell I'm demonstrating for? And I realized I was demonstrating for the factuality of facts. And I was wondering whether demonstrating was the right tool to prove that. But obviously, it needed to be done. So it's a crazy world in that sense. The environmental dimension we just covered, pollution, chemicals, and so forth is also an issue. The economic dimension, if I look at the plans of European car makers, steel makers, chemical companies, and so forth, air transport, the air carriers, what they want to achieve, which growth they want to achieve, then they plan to use about 5 to 20 times as much resources as now are being produced a year. The German chemical industry alone wants more in certain resources than the global production is today. You see? And that means that these demands will not be realized. It means that these companies will either learn in very short term that this is not the way to go, or they will collapse. A big collapse of northern industry because of unrealistic expectations. The alternative is that they fight against each other who gets other people's resources, which means using military means again to secure the access to resources of countries who do not want to sell them, not at the price the industrialized countries are offering. And then the conflict is between European countries, United States, partly China, and a bit of Japan, how they can divide a shrinking cake. And it still will not be enough for any of them. So the decision makers are living in a state of complete denial. Then we have corruption and populism, and the legitimacy of a democratic state rests on the livelihood it can offer to its citizens. And this is why I'm afraid of a loss of democracy in our countries. Growth, globalization, financialization are all failed concepts, and we have a lack of innovation for sustainability. People, engineers as well, are developing the next step forward in the same direction. But we need a turn. We need a turn which helps us to have technology, for example, which needs less resources. If we look at the volume of resources I expect to be available in 30 years, this will just be good enough to maintain the infrastructure we have. Because we have an infrastructure which has a high demand in maintenance inputs. So we have to renovate our infrastructures to make them less demanding, so we have something left over for other purposes. And that is a big investment program for the nearby future. And infrastructure then is public as well as private. So you see what I usually call the prism of sustainability. In this case, the sustainability is inside. What you see outside here is a prism of unsustainability. And I always emphasize it's a prism, not a prison. It's a different thing. So, still amongst the people, there is limited willingness to act, and the richer they are, the less they want to give. Look here, the consumer motivations, willingness to adopt climate-friendly behaviors, and then you look at what is the different measures suggested. And as a rule of thumb, the more effective a measure is, the less it's popular. Yeah? You do the easy things, which are not painful at all. But limiting flying is limiting beef consumption. Oh, really? Less heating or cooling your home? No. Huh? Things like that. This is also an important point. The well-off also changing their behavior is one of the most, or is the most important motivator for people to change their lives. So if you know that at the moment, 10% of the world population is consuming 50% of the resources and causing 50% of the CO2 emissions, then these people, the really rich people, which is a big group in our countries, a smaller group in our other countries, but not even the whole population in countries like Germany or France, they see every day that the ultra-rich live a lifestyle which is completely unsustainable and obviously enjoy it. They are called the rich and the beautiful, and I call them the rich and the dirty. Yeah? And those people are setting a standard of aspiration. And if you do not have a policy or politics to get the rich under control, you will never motivate the other people to do it. If you see that in the last decade in Europe, the average CO2 emissions per capita of the lower 50% of the income groups has been decreasing. The next 40% have been stable, but of the top 10%, they have been significantly increasing. Then you see that it's an absolutely irresponsible behavior of this group. And if you do not get them under control, you will not manage to do that. So wealth is one of the biggest problems that we have. Easy to say for me, I have no wealth. I told him I'm a member of that group, which is not very rare in many countries, which is I have a good living without being rich. So the small middle. So what they do, willing to donate for reforestation or willing to sign a petition, anybody wants to do that. Doesn't cost you very much, 2 minutes on the internet, second click, and that's it. But when it comes to limit driving, it's difficult. The second thing is, which countries are those where the people are most willing to change their lifestyles with more environmental protection? And then you see that the highest willingness is in China. So maybe that is one of the reasons why the Chinese said they want to reduce the CO2 emissions, because their population is demanding it. And second comes Italy, and then you can look here, Australia, Canada, Germany is not really good. Not the worst, but you can here look, China, India, Brazil, they don't even want to sign a petition. That's the Bolsonaro voters. So Turkey, Ukraine, if you look at Mexico, it's here. Also strong in signing petitions and opposed to less beef eating. Meat must be. So I think that was quite interesting to see how different the countries are, and that in particular the richest countries are, which are here, are significantly less willing to do something than the middle income countries over here. The public perception is different. And I always distinguish between incrementalists and transformationists. Incrementalists are asking, what do I have to change to make sure nothing changed substantially? And that is the reform promises we always get from the OECD, from the World Bank, from big business. They make proposals to make changes which make sure that nothing changes in the end, in the substance. And deconstructing a new building is what is needed. And I had a little paper looking at these two groups and seeing that for the last at least 50 or 70 years, they both exist. And that is usually governments and international institutions, and that's usually grassroots movements in all countries. But also some trade unions, some other social organizations, but that is the usual difference for the last 70 years. And I'm a bit afraid that this has worked for a long time, and it will not work any longer because the crisis situation we're in. And that the people who have been successful with this for 50 years will not realize that's the end of their road, and that they have to be much more radical in the reconstruction, because otherwise they are facing a collapse. So that's what I said. You can read the text yourself. Reading out jokes is so stupid. That is exactly as they act. Yeah, when they say that climate change is a big opportunity for investment and economic growth. And this is why I say, without power control, control of economic power, you will not reach any deviation from this current path to collapse. So, future. And of course, I know that the future is uncertain, that's for certain. But the funny thing about the future is that we do not know how it will look like, or we are all involved in creating it. So let's see what we can know. That is a planned increase in fossil fuel production 2030 relative to 2021. Increase in fossil fuel production. India by a factor of 12. Russia by a factor of 3. Indonesia 2.5. Colombia to come closer to you geographically, almost 2, and Australia. And you see it's here we have Saudi Arabia for the oil, it's US, Brazil, Canada, Russia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates. Here it's Qatar, again an Emirates, Russia, Nigeria, China, US, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia. China only appears here for the gas. The US appears here and here. Russia appears here, here, and here. So look at these current geopolitical conflicts. You have China, you have Russia, you have the United States, you have India as an upcoming nation, you have Brazil maybe wishing to be strongly involved in the international games. None of them is out of this list. They all plan to increase at a moment where the United Nations Secretary General clearly reiterated that every increase is dead. We must not have a single increase in production, because the resources we already have are enough to bring us to 3 degrees. So these guys are planning to gather the resources to bring us higher than that. And to illustrate that, that is what is implied by government policies. The international, what is really on the books. That is what governments have promised. You see the difference between promising and doing. Yeah? Promising at the COP. Yeah? Since 1992, we have repeated promises of financial support to third world countries for adaptation. Never ever paid out. Germany was really good in that. We had a fund of 400 million euros, which we donated 8 times, I think. The same money. Yeah? Promise it again and again, makes very good headlines. But, this is what is 2 degrees consistent. You see the government pledges are even there 2.6 to 3 degrees. And that is 1.5 consistent, and 1.5 is a point where the tipping cascades can start. So that is where we have to get. That is what governments have promised. That is what they are doing. And that is what is their plans announced in expanding the production. So that is the gap between plans and necessities. 2023 was already the hottest year since 125,000 years. I remember that pretty well, all the time. And the point is that not only we as humans are leaving the climate envelope in which human civilizations develop. The same is true for all the plants and animals we cultivate. They are all adapted to a certain climate envelope, which we are about completely to leave. So now we are in the 6th global wave of extinction. 1 million species is at risk, as IPBES has documented. It's for terrestrial and marine ecosystems. The ongoing forest destruction makes the age of pandemic probable. That's what I already mentioned earlier. Increasing pressure implies that many ecosystems cannot be revitalized. The EU is very good in missing a target and, as a compensation, articulating a stronger target. So they wanted to stop biodiversity loss, and then they wanted to stop and revert biodiversity loss, and now they want even to revert ecosystems, 30% of the countryside. Instead of measures, we have promises, but always the promises are getting better and better. Ecosystem loss undermines the basis of human tradition, culture, and knowledge. We have a water crisis. We had the strongest drought in Europe since 400 years, according to the European Statistical Office. The glaciers I mentioned, no drinking water for Lima I mentioned, water access competition will lead to political tensions. Today, Turkey, Iraq, Egypt, Sudan, and other countries, there are already military threats, and the Amazon rivers in the air will disappear. Sea level rise, Greenland ice sheet I mentioned. Glaciers, again, will contribute to that. Western East Atlantic inland ice is at the risk of being mobilized. I mentioned that as well. The North Pole without ice is accelerating, not warming. It's not getting warm, it's getting warmer. Sorry. The water access competition will lead to political tensions. So you see, here you have 2 different phenomena which interact and enhance each other. This is why some things are doubled. And then something which I find particularly worrisome is the tragedy of traditional knowledge. We have migrating species following climate gradients, and that means that some species are escaping from certain ecosystems, while other species migrate in. So we create completely new sets and mixtures of species in the different systems. Different speeds lead to that. If either they die out because they cannot migrate, or they migrate and they are far and they're gone, and others come in. So you have completely new biome compositions, and that means that nature, of course, will establish interactions between them. Food webs and new things will emerge. But the current situation will no longer be there. For example, some organisms are steered in their daily rhythms. Sometimes a biologist in me comes through. They are steered by the day length at the time of time signal. Others by the temperature as a time signal. So if the day length stays the same, but the temperature increases, two different organisms with these two different kinds of mechanisms are desynchronized. We now have birds or insects coming out at a time when the flowers are no longer flowering. We have birds coming when the insects are not there. We have migratory birds which do not migrate anymore.
It's okay.
Gravity is a strong force. So we have disruption of all these food webs and also reproductive webs. Of course, nature will establish new ones, but this is ones we do not know yet and which are not part of traditional knowledge. So what is happening is that we have a devaluation of traditional knowledge by a nature which is reshaped in a way that nobody knew that in the past. And that, I think, is a kind of a tragedy of traditional knowledge. Desynchronization, I mentioned, they are deeply changed. Microclimates offer a certain kind of shelter, but only they have a buffer capacity of 0.2 to 0.5 degrees, something like that. After that, they also collapse. So then the shelter capacity is exhausted. And it also depends very much on the water availability. One proposal I read this week was that repurposing areas. The idea was that we will have huge areas which are inundated landscapes, so land which has been flooded recently. And the idea was, well, if it's been flooded recently, then it's quite shallow. And if it's quite shallow, can't we use that for shrimp production? So repurposing seascapes, because they have been landscapes not too long ago, is a way of catastrophe thinking where there is no historical precedent for. So you cannot look for any kind of additional knowledge in that case. So it's for me, it's a bit of a shocking idea that you want to plan production systems based on land being flooded. So what we have to do, in fact, is we have to reduce the total throughput and the resource consumption of our economies and societies. You see here, you have here the input, in particular of organic material, into the system. And here you have the output. Some of that is usable stuff, and some of that is waste. Yeah, and so as long as this put system is as fat as it will always need more resources. In particular, to grow, it will need more resources. And you see, if you feed these stuff in here, that will never be enough to keep the system growing, because the circular economy is not really possible. So one of the key challenges that we have to slim the put system. Yeah, it's well, maybe not a slogan you can use on the street. Let's go slim the put, but I think you know what I mean. Beyond that, in good old Europe, we are facing some more challenges. According to my analysis, we have reached the end of the era of economic growth. The economists always hope for economic growth of about 2.3%, something like that. Over the last 20 years, in average, we had 0.8%. That is what called secular stagnation. Except for the last few years, when through COVID it went down and up, that was a roller coaster. But the time before, it was just like that. Secondly, we are in a situation that we have to invest an enormous amount of money in climate adaptation. And we do invest just as much money into military armament at the moment. Globally, 4.3 trillion, the highest volume ever. And by the way, the military armament needs the same resources than you need for decarbonization, for solar panels, for instance, and for digitalization. So military, digitalization, and decarbonization are three competing sectors for the same resources. And about resource scarcity, we talked already. So that would be interesting developments, because that means that in the end, you will have Apple and Microsoft against the military. So it's, which is the biggest customer. So it's quite an interesting constellation. We need the climate adaptation measures, and we need the climate repair measures for the adaptation we haven't done in the past. We need much more land dedicated to nature protection to preserve biodiversity. So we have an enormous amount of investment, and we need more money for social security, for social justice. And that means an enormous amount of money needs to be invested into things which are socially and societally and environmentally absolutely necessary, but from an economic point of view, not productive. So the total share of GDP which will be invested in productive purposes will be shrinking. And at a stage of 0.5 or 0.8% growth at the moment, shrinking productive investment means a decrease in GDP. And that is a process which is also has a tipping point and then accelerates itself. And what does that mean for the healthcare system? What does that mean for the pension systems, which are all dependent on growth so far, is absolutely unclear. And our governments refuse to discuss the possibility that there are even now some neoclassical economists who said, we don't believe in degrowth. But maybe we cannot avoid it. So let's think about the contingency plan. And so at least some begin to think, but it's a minority. This is also one thing I wanted to mention. Come on here. The internationally promised money for climate adaptation mitigation will also be not there anymore. And interestingly, I've seen too much efforts, in particular in the South, steered towards carbon dioxide reduction. If you look at the greenhouse gas profile, it is the old industrialized countries like the UK, Germany, so Western Europe, where the greenhouse gases are absolutely dominated by CO2. Whereas typically in countries in the South, the greenhouse gases are dominated by methane, partly from natural gas production, but the majority from agriculture. So when these countries are pushed to reduce their CO2 emissions, then this addresses a tiny fraction, 10% of their emissions, whereas the majority is not addressed. Interestingly, the United States is about 50-50. So it's just between developing countries and the developed countries in the profile of their greenhouse gas emissions. So that was a kind of colonized mind that the people forgot to focus on the methane emissions, because methane is as 30 times as intensive greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. Focusing on that would have been buying us 10 more years to go down with the CO2 emissions from the industrialized countries. So this kind of differentiated approach, that is what I call colonized minds, because it was simply the Western or the Northern industrialized countries concept was just transmitted to the South without adapting into the different circumstances. And the different circumstances in that case are simply physical. You can measure them. So, and that is a big challenge to our consumer societies. The lifestyle you ordered is out of stock. And the problem with that is that overconsumption, which is a privilege and a very unfair privilege and very unhealthy privilege, is perceived as an entitlement. And as soon as you want to take something away from that, the resistance will be fierce and brutal. And our governments draw the conclusions that if you reduce production and consumption, and as efficiency and circularity will not be enough, there must be green growth. So green growth must be possible, not is possible. All facts are against it, but it must be possible because otherwise they could not deliver on their promises. So you make unrealistic assumptions to be able to promise what is not possible. And so I refer to the wisdom of the Dakotas when you discover that you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. You know this kind of wisdom, there are 10 different alternatives. We send the jockey to US to take a training course, or we buy more high energy feed, or we adopt our goals to the new circumstances. Or we take 2 dead horses in front of the cart. So it's that's all the stuff that we do. So that is the end. And as I said, the presentation will be available right there, but is not yet. And so I took a bit too long, and I hope you survived it.
Yeah.
If you have questions, please.
Thank you very much. ¿Alguien quiere compartir alguna pregunta o comentario?
Yo tengo una pregunta. ¿Puedo hacer?
Por supuesto.
Yes.
In English.
Well, maybe, well, thank you. Maybe you said something about my question, but maybe the English and all that. But how can we break the paradox between the transition of the energy matrix, and the extractivism, because here in Latin America, the extractivism is very strong, It's like right now the green hydrogen, green hydrogen.
Yeah.
So, but all that going to Europe to continue the same machine growth. So it's possible. It's really possible, the transition of the energy matrix, or it's like a green, like a, I don't know.
On the one hand, I think it is very clear that we must in future produce all our energy from renewable sources. Yeah? According to the studies we have done, I'm also chairing the scientific committee of one of Germany's largest environmental NGOs. We have been doing studies on that. We can produce the energy that we need in Germany if we manage to reduce the total primary energy consumption by at least 50%. And that would, of course, also reduce the need for all kinds of metals to be put into that. And one of the papers I've written, I've been saying that we are moving from the fossil age to a new metal age. And in this metal age, we make ourselves dependent on other substances and other countries, which may be just as unpleasant as ones we had before. So it's less Saudi Arabia and less Russia, and instead it's more China and more, what have you, Congo. So I think the absolute necessity is that we give up the dream of permanent growth and that we prepare strategies how we can safeguard a good life without economic growth. And that means that also the idea of what is a good life needs to change. That was some friends in Latin America called the decolonization of the minds. But to reach that, it is very important that you have what I mentioned, the politics of ruling in the rich. Because as long as they are role models, the same kind of orientation will continue.
Yes.
And so in my old days, I become a social radical saying we must get the rich under control and we must end the accumulation of wealth. Because from an environmental point of view, that is the most important obstacle at the moment. Technology you can develop, but these people stop it, they undermine it. I would love to put all billionaires on a small island somewhere, give them some equipment for agriculture, and then see whether they manage to make a livelihood. And one more sentence on that. This is, I don't like the discussion between the North and South as a sort of geographical orientation. I think the old terminology of periphery and center was more precise, because you have parts of the periphery, small part of the periphery in the rich countries, and you have parts of the center in all countries around the world, bigger or smaller. So that's what we now call the global consumer class, and a third of that is in the south. So this center periphery is old-fashioned, but it's still, I think, fitting better than what we use today.
You just mentioned the one of the sides of this prism, the crisis of democracy, and what you are saying will be very unpopular, because, and this is related to the crisis of democracy in the sense of governments, especially in South America, they like to promise things, and the models that we are follow are own, we cannot reach them. And even in Berlin, I went to Humboldt Forum, where the crisis of democracy was very important. So it's not maybe not an easy answer, but you can make a reflection on that, maybe.
Yeah, it's not easy, but I talked to a politician about the need to speak out what is there. And he said, Cassandra has never been elected. You know, Cassandra, the prophet from the ancient Greece who was predicting all kinds of catastrophes. She was never elected. I said, on the other hand, when I talk to ordinary people and tell them about this kind of developments, they say, well, it's good to know. I had a feeling there is something going on like that, but it's good to know it better. And that people do not like the message, but accept that it is a fact. And I do believe, but that's a very private conviction, that if it turns out that what government promises year after year is a lie year after year, that is undermining the trust in democratic governments more than any bad message. What I talk to psychologists, so sometimes we even talk with funny disciplines, and he said, what we would need today is, in our countries where the economic growth will be over or is over, we would need a chancellor or vice chancellor who gets up and says, people, we had 50 years of growth. It was a great time. We have many achievements. We are well off today. And now the time is over. But don't be worried. The next period, the next era will be different. but it won't be bad. But we have to make it well. Yeah? And so he said that people, if they have been living with such an idea so long, like having lived with a partner so long who died, need a period of mourning, a kind of mental farewell, an emotional farewell to a past era, before they are mentally open to start something new. And you must help them doing that by saying that is a situation, it is a fact, but you are not alone. There are others with you. We are caring for you, and there will be a better future. But as long as you tell them, we can revive it, they will never be ready for something new. Yeah? So I think that maybe in the short run, it's very difficult to come with an inconvenient truth. People prefer a convenient lie. But in the longer run, I think making promises and predictions which never materialize is eroding the trust in a democratic system so much that it might collapse. So I think it's a responsibility of good policymakers, if you find one, to speak out what is the truth, including saying, we didn't want it. It happened. Shit. We didn't want climate change. We didn't make it. Others made it. But we can't ignore it here. So we have to adapt to it. How can we do that? Whose resources can be mobilized? Where do we take it from? And that is also a little remark to you. When we did our scenarios, we also calculated that we can reduce the total amount of metals and minerals that we use by the mid of the century, also by 50%. That would be possible if you really attempt to. And that would address a lot of the extractivism as far as we are involved. But I'm not yet chancellor, so it's not really. No, but at least we can show that it's possible. So it's not a matter of possibility and technology; it's a matter of politics.
You were also talking about neoclassic economy, and you just told me a funny aspect of trying to publish a paper and saying that neoclassic economy might be not working anymore. If you can comment on this, and also if we can get inspiration from Chilean economists who make a path towards green economy or circular economy. You can maybe comment on that too.
Yeah, so changing hands, biologist is gone, economist comes in. I would not say that neoclassical economics doesn't work anymore, because that presupposes that it has worked. It has never worked. Yeah. So what we have done is we took a number of natural scientists and economists, and we asked ourselves the question, what is the minimum conditions of a science? And we had some statements, some proofs, some lemmata. So the usual way you do a good natural science study, and the conclusion was that the neoclassical economic view is based on a number of assumptions which are in flagrant contradiction to empirical knowledge and thus need to be rejected. And so that neoclassical economics may be legitimate as a worldview, but it is not a science, and political decisions should not be based on it, because you can make horrible decisions based on good scientific information, but you will not be able to make good politics based on completely wrong information. and that is why it was then rejected, because the economic system is not a scientific system. In a scientific system, you have an argumentation, and then you look at that and say, have they major omissions in the assumptions? Is it very long assumptions? If not so, is the logic fine in the logical conclusions? And if all three is okay, then even undesired or unpleasant result must be accepted, because the story behind the way it was derived is sound. And in economics, if you do not confirm with the neoclassical paradigm, then because your result is wrong, your arguments don't count. I remember a couple of years ago, I've been writing a paper on a similar issue, that the environmental and resource economics, which is an extension of the neoclassical economics, is not working. And then I got a rejection from the journal based on a reviewer who wrote that your argument is flying directly into the face of environmental and resource economics. Yes, that was the purpose.
Okay.
And but the second reviewer was a biologist, and he said, "Wonderful, publish it." And then they sent it to the second round, and the result was the same. One person said, "No publication at all, not even major revisions, no publication." And the other said, "The title could be a bit more precise, but besides that, publish as it is." And then the editor wrote to me, I should take both reviews into account when revising the paper. And I said, well, in that case, what about you have a look at it and see how much censorship you want in your journal? And then he accepted it. But that was a scientific journal. This one rejected right now was Nature. And Nature rejected it because the result was unbalanced. So what is balance in science? And also balance in politics. But they always they send these papers to reviewers, which are neoclassicals, and if they don't like it, it's rejected. Yeah, so it's a self-stabilizing belief system, and you can only wait for its collapse. And we need definitely, and as I said, I think it's very clear to show that neither social reality nor environmental reality is taken account. This system is clearly trying to ignore the laws of nature. It cannot be working like that. It's a perpetuum mobile, which is completely abstracting from everything outside. You have this economic circle between goods which are produced, people earn some money, they buy them, and then the money flows back. Only money is flowing. That is like Herman Daly described it as if you are in a kitchen, there is a cook who has all the equipment, and he promises you to bake the finest things for you without any resources flowing in and any waste flowing out. It may be a very skilled cook, but without any grain, water, and milk and eggs, he will not be able to do much. But that is how neoclassical economics works. And that is why ecological economics includes these elements, but it's quite important, I think, that we go beyond only the environmental side, and integrate the social side. That was my big surprise at the 1992 Rio conference. Yeah, it's, I'm old, yeah. Because all people coming, all civil society people coming from the north were motivated, amongst others, by the Limits to Growth report. And most people which are meant from Latin America were motivated by the Limits to Misery report, the Barilov report. Which was completely unknown in the north. And at that time, the Limits to Growth was about future problems emerging And Barrelo's report was about current problem solving. In the meantime, that has changed. Both are current problems. And they need to be solved together, otherwise we won't succeed. And there's a few economists who have been working in that direction, and one of the most famous ones, which I know, and the best ones, was Manfred Max Neef from Chile. I don't have to describe him to you. You know, you all probably are aware of his work.
Not that much.
Not that much.
We should.
The younger people, are you aware of his work?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the young ones.
Alfred Magni.
No, I'm thinking de manera general, creo que I think the words we use are so important, especially in the politic notes, because that are writing and we nos regimos que está escrito la política. Eso no sé cómo decirlo
¿En Chile en particular?
en todo el mundo.
We follow the politics mostly.
Claro.
The law, no? Right.
And these rights, the words we use in that politics must be more specific to actions. I think that. Another one, I think only now the world have the capacity to regenerate alone for himself, but ¿hasta qué punto?
The regeneration can happen, but to what point?
Yes.
Asking.
It's like reflection.
Yeah. He has nothing to say, obviously.
She's very shy.
No, she doesn't have to. So I think Manfred has been working on a wide range of issues. So it's good to look into the internet to see his publication list, the broad set. I use particularly two kinds of his work. One is he has been working on a threshold concept. That is, if people are really poor, if they get some more resources, it increases their quality of life. Yeah, because if you are no longer starving, it's of course a better quality of life. But the correlation between income and quality of life only goes to a certain point, and then the quality of life does no longer increase with increasing income. So he was saying that everybody should have that minimum to have a good quality of life, but nobody needs to have that what is higher than that. So this threshold concept in different varieties, based on money, based on resource access and things like that, is one of the things which are very important. And the most important thing for me, which I use every day, is economists are saying that economic growth cannot be stopped because human needs are infinite. And that is why there's more and more demand, and demand is driving the economy. And Manfred looked at it with an international team already in the 1980s, I think, and found that the human needs must be distinguished from what is satisfiers for the needs. So he said human needs are a limited number and they are universal in different global cultures. So a limited number of needs, and most of these needs can best, or many of these needs can best be fulfilled by social processes. If you want security, being a member of a community which gives you security is probably better than having an insurance. there is acceptance, there is the emotional needs. Many of these things, in particular, any kind of emotional needs, are human interrelations. Yeah? But look at the billboards outside. How many of the products they advertise are advertised as creating emotional satisfaction? Yeah? So he said there is a limited number of needs, but what is infinite is the satisfiers. And that is what capitalism is doing, inventing more and more new satisfiers. But that doesn't mean that they are better. So sustainable consumption is not about suppressing human needs, it is about finding the least environmentally and socially damaging satisfiers. Yeah? And then there are some kind of pseudo satisfiers which are promised but do not deliver. Then there are some kind of toxic satisfiers like drugs, which may make you feel good for a moment, but then undermine your existence. Yeah? Except, of course, drugs like coffee. Yeah. Yeah, you have to admit when you're addicted. So that is a concept which really is underpinning most of the modern discussion about sustainable consumption. And we know in the meantime, in the beginning, the sustainable consumption discussion was about consuming differently. And then we did some material analysis through the whole of the economy, and we found that this doesn't make a big difference. Because the goods they consume are transported on the same lorries. In the whole value chain, the whole production chain, they're using so much of the other infrastructure that the difference in products is minuscule. What is really needed not in the northern countries, by the global consumer class is consuming less. And consuming less in material goods is only acceptable if human needs are met. And this is why the distinction between needs and satisfiers is so important. You can keep the level of satisfaction by having different satisfiers, which are less socially and environmentally disturbing. And I think that's a marvelous concept. Doesn't that sound good?
Yeah.
Right. So mejor toda la frase.
¿Cómo llegamos a consumir menos?
Sí. How can we arrive to consume less?
This is
Like society.
Yeah.
¿Como sociedad o cada uno?
como sociedad, porque al final
Well,
es global.
when I talk about sustainable consumption, that means that over-consumers have to consume less and under-consumers have to get more. Poverty is socially unsustainable as much as overconsumption is environmentally unsustainable. I remember when I was giving a presentation as a development bank of Southern Africa, and I talked about the environmental space and consumption. And they said, well, yeah, we have some very rich people, and it might well be possible to rein them in. And I said, yeah, but it's not only overconsumption, it's also underconsumption. And they said, do you want to start a revolution? And I asked them, is that necessary? And when I asked them, is that necessary? The communication ended. Yeah. Sustainable consumption is both socially and environmentally benign. Yeah? And then you have the problem again of the rich overconsumers. And probably you have to limit wealth and reduce wealth disparities, probably. And you can still make sure that people are have the level of need satisfaction by having better satisfiers. For example, I had an example here in Chile. I had been buying my new sneakers, Adidas. and someone bought new sneakers, Adidas, in Chile. Mine were about twice as expensive as the ones bought in Chile. But the average life expectancy was 4 times higher. So in principle, I had the service of having a nice shoe for half the price. So sometimes if you buy less but better, you are better off. If you do the same thing with a washing machine in your household, you can have a high energy efficient and low water consuming, blah, 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 the best model in that case. The problem is it will be more expensive. But only in the short run. Over time, it will save you water cost, it will save you washing powder, it will save electricity and things like that. So it's a good investment. After 10 years, you have saved a lot of money. For that, for example, you need a cooperative bank, which gives cheap loans to people who buy such a kind of a super washing machine, and they pay that back from what they save in electricity and water. So if you pay something, save something every month, you can use that to pay back the credit. The normal banks don't do that. But why shouldn't cooperatives offer that to people? So I think it shows that you have to reorder very many elements of the financial systems, the economic systems, the production systems, the consumption system, all of that. So it will be a very different world.
I think one of the big problem, all the people in the world thinks that I have solution based.
A solution?
Have solutions based.
The solution is something you can buy. But
no.
No, she said that the people.
Yeah. There is one rule of thumb that if a problem is political, it needs a political solution, and you cannot technologically buy out of that. Technology is good in solving technical problems, but nothing else. You will never correct an unfair income distribution with technology. So that is the big illusion.
But right now it's a bit complicated, the technological political issue, because people do politics in internet, in Twitter, like it's not so easy. And the information is in the social media and all that. So this is a political element.
No, I talked to someone in the UK. There were a number of young people who were strongly convinced that they wanted to have an Erasmus program funded studying on the continent. And when there was a campaign against for Brexit, they were very active in the internet and saying, no, that's nonsense. But they didn't go vote on the voting day. And after that, they said they had realized that the real world is somewhere else. And that is, as the people said, they are easily ready to 96% support an internet petition. And when it comes to changing your eating behavior or your mobility behavior, the readiness is less. So being around in the internet is no excuse. It can be nice, but you've seen the address. You can get my presentations or my papers in the internet, and even I'm old enough to still have a Facebook page, which I use to share my photos and things like that. It is important, it is useful, but it's not the real world.
Okay.
And I always thought that influenza
Yeah,
is a disease.
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah.
And now I know that influenza is very important in the internet. Yeah. And it's a disease.
Here is the last question, and then we can think about closing the table.
Hi, I am Sergio. What do you think about the advance of negationist politicians about the climate change, and how affect this advance or the change of change of perspective about the climate crisis?
The advance.
Climate negationist.
O sea, ¿cómo afecta el avance de estos políticos
Denials.
Denials.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. I'm European. In Europe, we have almost no climate denials. But what we have is a massive crowd of climate impact denials. So that's when I said lack of urgency, lack of understanding. So yeah, there is climate change and we're going to deal with it. Yeah. We make a promise. Yeah. But the climate impact, they don't feel so serious. In the United States and in some other countries, you have a lot of people who are denying that climate change exists. At least I know two kinds. One kind is saying that it doesn't exist, it's all natural. And you cannot convince them simply because all arguments are known, and they have known of all arguments, and they do not want to acknowledge them. Yeah? So because they believe in something else which is important to them, you just must make sure that they are kept from power. Yeah? And then there are others which are interesting. I talked to someone who said, yeah, of course we have climate change. Yes, of course the world is going down the drain. Huh? But whatever happens on Earth is God's plan, and we should not oppose it. Yeah?
Very convenient.
Yeah. You have an excuse, you have to do nothing, and you should be old enough to afford it, because otherwise you have to live in the mess. Yeah? So, but that is the kind of mentality I have problems to understand. Yeah. The other one is partly interest driven. If you are selling coal and oil and making billions with that, you better claim it's harmless. Like a tobacco company was claiming smoking is harmless. So Shell, since the 1950s, knew that climate change is caused by their products. It's proven now, internal documents. But they denied it publicly. So it's a matter of money. And the chairman of Exxon has just announced that he thinks that by 2050, there will be still a big money being made with oil, maybe a bit less than now, but still good reason to invest now in drilling for new oil. And I only can wish that these companies, because these companies go from the assumption that governments will not keep their promises. And if the companies are right, well, then you should go. Then you should become neoliberal and let the decisions to the companies, because if the government follows them anyway, or they are wrong, and then they are producing billions of stranded assets, and that's what I hope for. Yeah, that's the biggest punishment for an investor, losing your money because you have been relying on the wrong assumptions. So I wish a bit of backbone to our politicians.
Oh, the last commentary.
Have you been in this kind of presentation or meeting with the global companies, for example, I mean, Mercedes-Benz or whatever, MAN,
Exxon.
because the reason why is maybe Germany signed some agreement, environment agreement. However, the company like Mercedes-Benz moved their production to Brazil, for example, or another country that does not sign the agreement.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Well, German car companies are even more stupid. They have their biggest markets is Europe, US, and China. And they have been hesitating to go electric for so long that they are now losing money in US, China, and Europe. In particular, in China, they're losing the market. Mercedes and BMW are particularly bad because they still want to have combustion engines, and Volkswagen is trying to catch up with bio dreams and things like that. So they are really stupid. And part of them still don't understand what is the situation. So even the foreign investments are at risk because they have missed the idea. Chemical industry is a bit bullshit. This Porsche company investing millions in a hydrogen company in northern Chile. And then look at the energy efficiency of getting solar energy, transforming that into hydrogen, cooling that down to some minus 200 something degree, putting that on a tanker, shipping that to Germany because your Porsche car is there waiting for it. If you order me to consider to design the most inefficient energy supply system, it would be looking quite similar. So that is something which I think will not pay out economically. So chemical industry is a difficult case because they want to a replacement for fossil fuels by natural inputs, carbon-free. But there is not enough biomass for them because they have a certain kind of big cracker and then the following equipment, and they want to keep that. So they would just want to replace one substance by the other. So they can use the same equipment because it's written off, it makes a lot of money. But they will need to invest billions to get into another structure, which they do not want to do. And I'm afraid that the German chemical industry is going to be just as backwards as the German automobile industry. And it's interesting, we had, in my activity as an NGO, we had joint projects with the Metal Workers Union, which is the biggest industrial union in the world. So they have some power, and they are also in the management board of the companies. And they understand it. And they say we must find strategies which make the workers to become agents shaping their own destiny. It's not, many people say, we're going to make a shift and we have to take them with us. No, not take them with you. They must be the agents of their own destiny. But in the restrictions and frames of the environmental and other conditions, this is why it's important to be truthful about that. So I think there is some movement, but I'm afraid that many of the big business decision makers are also living in a bubble. And in that bubble, issues like end of growth and limits to profits and reducing wealth are not very popular.
Not in the vocabulary.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joachim, for this time and for the presentation and for the discussion. And this. We will be trying to do our best for read Manfred Max Neff and several economists that can still inspire our present and future behavior as consumers and as academicians. Thank you very much. And thank you all the public here in the room.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure and honor to be here.